Hello everyone, it's Toby and today we're doing some first impressions of these new brushes. So these are the Vinci Casaneo Travel Brushes. Not used them before, well, until today of course. And I've bought these, so I've not been sent them, I've not been asked to use them, but I've seen them lots and lots. And I bought them because what I was looking for was basically some travel brushes which weren't just your standard round brush. And what I've got here are travel brushes, one of which is a size 2 mop, which is the size I absolutely love using, and a size 10 dagger brush, or sword liner, or angled brush, whatever you want to call it. Basically it's got this big point, but also a long flat side, long sort of fibres, and that lets you do all sorts. So without further ado, let's have a look at these brushes and see what we make of them, or at least what our first impressions are. Now the first thing is, how do they work? Why are they travel brushes? Well, you can see this kind of screw thread here, and there's another one hidden under here. And basically a travel brush is just one where you can pop away your easily damaged hairs or fibres, and just like magic, pop it in your bag. This means you can chuck it in your bag and it's not going to get damaged. Now, is the screw top of any major advantage? I think not really, realistically. So it's really nice and it does feel good, and it certainly provides a really safe seal. There's no way this is falling apart. But if you look at my normal brushes, so this is my trusty size 10 round brush, it just has a little pull, and that also doesn't come apart. And when I pop it on over the top, it doesn't come apart. It's never fallen apart in my bag. So is there an advantage to the screw top? If you let me know in the comments, I'll be very grateful. But I don't think there is, apart from it seeming a bit more fancy. So what other things does that screw top impact? Well, I'm not sure if it's because of the screw top or not, but you can see the handle is much bigger, much thicker. If I show you end on as well, you'll see that this is a chunky brush. Or the brush isn't, but certainly the handle is. Now I have been sort of painting with these a little bit today. You'll see a couple of tutorials coming up where I'm using them. My initial thought was, is it too big? Are these just literally going to be too weird, too difficult to hold, or is it just not going to work for me? I've actually been pleasantly surprised. It took a little bit of just getting used to. It's like if you were trying to draw with a pen like this and then suddenly your pen tripled in size, your handwriting would change. Well, I got a little bit of that effect, but not too much. Actually, it's still relatively easy to control. If I just do a little doodle, you can get pretty nice control. I just tend to hold it actually quite low down when I'm doing things which are specific. And then when I'm doing big sort of washes, well, I just hold it further back. So, I mean, I very quickly adapted. So if that's something which was worrying you, I have quite large hands, I guess. That's the only thing I'd say. But if that's something that's worrying you, it hasn't bothered me. And they do feel rather nice. They're quite chunky. They're quite meaty to hold. They feel like a sort of premium product. With that, let's move on to actually doing a bit more of this, a bit more of testing how they function. A key part of the brush is the brush. What's it made of? This is synthetic. They call it synthetic squirrel hair, which is obviously totally meaningless. Just it's synthetic, and they want it to act like the fancy brushes. Now in my little range that I normally use, I've got another synthetic brush, and I've got a mixed synthetic and squirrel brush. Now I actually bought this one by accident. Now the reason that I bought it by accident is because I thought it was a synthetic brush, and I try to avoid animal products in general, not at all costs, but for me, the synthetics for simple sketching are plenty good enough. Or most of them are. There are bad synthetics out there and there are good synthetics. But I don't see the need for me to employ some squirrels, remove the hair and use it. I'd prefer to just have these synthetics. That's my feelings. Now with the synthetics, there are good and there are bad. This Escoda Versatile comes for me under the good range. When I say good, I mean you can get loads of water in there. I can draw a line, it will keep going and keep going and keep going, and this brush will keep going plenty enough for me to do all I want in between loading it up with more paint. It doesn't run dry, it doesn't become scratchy, and this is a moderately cheap, certainly not a total budget brush, but it's not expensive. Now, the reason I'm whittering on about that is because I want to be able to compare it. This one, this Escoda, is a size 10 round brush. You can see it's a little bit smaller than this size 2 mop, and the point in theory should be a little bit firmer, a little bit springier. And let's just have a play with this mop and see what it's up to. So we'll do this first. We'll do exactly the same. Take some cobalt blue. Got a nice wet brush. Can I make that fine line? Yes, I can. It's not a fair test. I think I've not picked up as much cobalt blue, but does this keep going? And actually, yes, it keeps going just as well, if not perhaps a bit better than my previous brush. Now that's to be expected, and the reason is it's got a bigger belly, so it should hold more water and therefore keep going for longer. And perhaps actually that's also why it started off. You can see it starts off less saturated, less bold. Perhaps because, you know, with mops they are more watery, so it's harder to get a really bold bit of pigment on the page. Now the other thing you want a mop for, less really drawing long lines. A mop is all about big loose washes. So if we take a different colour, let's take some red. What I want to see is that just with one little top up of paint, I can create a nice big smooth patch of colour. I don't want it to go dry, I don't want it to become textured, I don't want it to graduate too much. And what you can see is it's graduating a little bit, but it really doesn't start graduating until about here, does it? Maybe a little bit before that, but at this point we are starting to get texture, starting to get definite graduation, it's starting to become less smooth. You know what? I think that's a pretty good performance though. If we compare that again to what I've been using previously, we'll just take my nice round brush, we'll use exactly the same pigment. This is a size 10 round, so it shouldn't last as long, but let's see, does it? Does it last as long or longer? I think it's graduating much more, and look, it's already sort of almost dry. So there you go, this mop is doing its job. That's what we can say from that test. This mop here is doing a better job than my round. Now, just so we don't forget which was which, we'll put Da Vinci, so we'll put DV mop, and up here we'll put Escoda Versatile size 10. So, brilliant. We have got a good result from our mop. What I will say, things I'm noticing as I'm using it, it's got a very good spring to its fibres. You can probably even see that when we splash, it will produce loads of splashes because of that spring. That means it should maintain a nice point. It's not necessarily designed for that, but it should maintain a nice point. The only disadvantage to a lot of spring is if it's not very rigid, and if you're clumsy like me, it can be hard to keep that point on the paper, and you end up getting these big blotches instead of being able to do really neat long lines, which take concentration with a more springy, more flexible brush to get these fine lines. But, you know, that's more a me problem than a this brush problem. I think with that, that's a good test of our mop. So I'm actually going to just dry it off and then pop it to one side. We'll even, because we can, we'll even put the lid back on. Now on to first impressions of the sword. So the sword, the dagger, the angled shader, this is a size 10. Normally they're actually described in either their length or their width, I've found. And what these are designed for is to be an everything brush for sketchers, or to be more specific for watercolorists. So the reason they're an everything brush for sketchers is because you can get this incredibly fine line. And you can see here, actually, it's not that hard at all, even for me, to keep a quite nice fine line. But equally, you should be able to get nice blocks of colour. So we should be able to just produce a nice block and another block. We can imagine maybe this is some kind of green little city scene just coming along. And we should just be able to create these really simple flat areas of colour. Thus you can create not just these fine lines, but also you can start creating blocks of colour. So that's why you can do your loose wash at the beginning, you can do your details at the end, all with one sort of simple brush. The reason they might have a more specific sort of aim with people who are more watercolour painters, who have a big range of brushes for specific things, is because they can be used either for these detailed lines or for things like foliage, because you can drag them across the page and create these kind of leaf-like textures. You can sort of make them flow and dance and get these kind of branching textures. So you can use them for really specific textural lines, as well as, you know, a catch anything brush. And I think just in doing this, we've seen probably quite a good demonstration that this brush does what it's supposed to. Again, for me, these are less cultured than I would like. I think with some of my other brushes, which are more stiff, I'm able to create a more controlled kind of feel to this line. But I think that's probably a me problem, not a brush problem. That's me being a bit impatient. I'm always a bit impatient, and therefore if something's more flexible, it tends to fold under my impatience. In terms of creating a big wash, well, I wouldn't expect this to do as well. You see, it's got a very narrow area, so it should create a nice area. And you can see it creates a pretty good area, but even here, we just started to dry out. And for me, these brushes always do tend to dry out rather suddenly, because they just have, you know, long brushes to create these lovely textures, but they don't have a really fat belly to hold loads of water. And with that, I think that's my little first impressions all done. We've gone through making a point, we've gone through making washes, we've gone sort of comparing the reasons behind this versus a round brush. Fundamentally, I'm going to keep experimenting with them. They're not super expensive, they're not cheap either. So they're a bit of a gamble, but I'll let you know how they're doing by posting some more tutorials. So if you want to see those, you want to find out more about these brushes, just subscribe and I'm sure you'll see them. Links to these brushes are down below, where you can get them from Jackson's Art, really wonderful supplier of arts stuff in general. Better, I think, again, ethically, my ethics, my decision, not yours, better than Amazon. But I'm sure these are also available on Amazon if that is more convenient for you. And with that, have a good day and happy sketching. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel, because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.